Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University. My name's Jeff Pearson, and I'm here with my co-host,
Stephen White.
Hello, Stephen. How are you doing?
Doing great, Jeff. Excited to introduce our guest here that we have on, Bryan Hawkes from the Property Stick. I've got some experience working with Bryan, and I met him, about a month or two ago, and he's a great guy, great story, so really excited to have him on here today.
Welcome, Bryan. How are you doing today?
Good. Hi, Jeff. Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, Steve, as you said, we've kind of connected recently, and I'm excited to join the podcast and bring some of our stories and some of our thoughts on Property Stick and to your listeners.
That sounds fun. Now, we talked a little bit before we started recording about the Property Stick and a little bit about the story that you got here. Let's start with the story and help people to understand how you arrived at starting this business, the Property Stick, and then we're going to jump into what Property Stick is. So go ahead and start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about yourself and the journey you've taken to this point.
Sure. Well, as I always kind of joke when I say I will try to give you the short version of this story, but as you may know, connecting with folks that really have a passion for what they do, sometimes the story can drag on a bit, but my background, my brother Jeff Hawkes and I founded the company, but our story goes back, if I can take us way back to 2006, and we were in kind of your typical corporate world, corporate jobs of sorts, and I always had some kind of bigger plan or there's something maybe different than working your corporate ladder type gig, and so we started looking at investments and businesses and so forth, and that led us to a commercial property and business in a small Wisconsin college town that had a university in it. And so we went through the purchase process of that commercial property with kind of a bar and grill contained in it, and then a small 2-unit apartment building above it. And we proceeded to open the doors essentially to the business that was closed down and boarded up, if you will. But the build out of that property was beautiful. So we thought, well, if we could, just run a successful business, then maybe there's some value there in that marketplace. And so we purchased that property, and the story, I guess, kind of starts then in April of 2007. And I always note the dates as, now that we look back on kind of the Great Recession of sorts and how the market was up and down and prices of real estate were up and down and so forth. But we jumped into that world. We had never run a hospitality business. We had never ran a rental property of sorts. And nevertheless, in April of 2007, we started it, and fast forward to October of 2009, we exited that whole property and that business. And it was kind of your classic buy low and sell high of sorts. And that was our first taste of the kind of the real estate world, obviously on the commercial side of things, but that was it was an exciting plan. Obviously we made money on our investment, and we were looking for the next thing. And my brother and I are originally from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And so we were back looking for the next thing, and that led us to college rentals. And we were looking around all of the universities in town and in certain areas where property A versus property B. And we started to really look at a lot of the properties out there. And again, we hadn't done anything on the residential side. Our experience again was just from that commercial property and business. And so we started looking and figuring out, well, why this property versus another? And as you guys know, there's a million online calculators, and there's a million resources that can help you with an analysis of a income property. But we couldn't find what we wanted, because one calculator had A and one calculator had B, and one would calculate your mortgage, and one would give you maybe the depreciation expense and how that had an effect on your tax burden and so forth. And so we started to build a calculator, and everyone has an Excel calculator that they've maybe got from a friend or an industry colleague, but we started to build our own. And We added things over the course of time as we looked at properties and new factors we wanted to consider to, really get the full picture of a residential college rental property. And that's kind of how the short version, if you will, of how the company started and kind of how we built a tool that, as we shared it with some industry insiders and some of our friends and colleagues in the industry, in the real estate and finance industry, they said, wow, this seems pretty advanced and a lot more advanced than even we use. Can we use it? And that led us to kind of the concept of maybe there was a better mousetrap in that rental analysis space. And here we are today, still kind of building the platform, but something a bit that we've really enjoyed through the process. And now I think we have a pretty cool tool online that's available for all folks out there now.
That's great to hear. Now, I really want to dig into the tool and talk about the tool, but I'd like to know a little bit more about the residential rentals that you had, that you rented to the college students. Tell us a little bit about that. How many properties did you have, and what were your experiences renting to the college students?
Well, so we were originally looking at, there's one property that I think kind of sums up our experience, if you will, in terms of what we were originally looking for and what we found and how we started to kind of process through this factor of a property versus that, and what that would equate in terms of return on equity and cash return and tax liability. But there was a property that was a duplex. It was upstairs and downstairs, and it was very near one of the campuses, or excuse me, one of the local university campuses. And we started looking at that property, and it was a 2-bed up, 2-bed down, and it was a 4 and 4. So it was 4 up and 4 down. And I'm not sure if you guys want me to get into some of the numbers of sorts, but
yeah, let's hear it.
There's a lot of. I suppose that's kind of what we're here for. So the purchase price on the property was about $120,000. That was the asking price on the property, and what we deemed rents to be in the area were about $250 a bedroom for a college kid. And so we were, in that very simple equation, if we were getting $1,000 down and $1,000 for the unit upstairs, then for the most part, you can run the numbers and say, oh, that might be a pretty good rental. So, but there was a lot of issues with it. The siding was old. The roof had an issue. It was, one of those rentals that was built 100 some years ago, and had a boiler in the basement. And we started to really look at, well, wait a minute, there's got to be more to it than, okay, we make some money each month on the rent, but what if this thing we need this to be replaced and that to be replaced. So we really started to look at kind of the real cost that a landlord will have, and they may not be today, and they might be kind of starstruck by, wow, this thing really cash flows, the payment and the tax implications, or excuse me, the tax and your insurance. And then, but what about next year? These windows look like they're pretty rough. Well, what's that going to cost us? And how about that roof? That looks like that's, according to our appraiser and our roofing guy, that looks like that's going to go here in the next couple of years. And before you know it, you start to add up all of these expenses, and that really changes your cash flow, not only in year 1, but in year 3 when the next thing needs to be done, and year 5, and so on and so forth. So that is a bit more, I guess, if I can say, a kind of a dive into a real specific property and how we really started to look past the, the numbers on paper. What's the price? What rent can I get? How quickly can we close? How much do we got to invest, and so forth.
And that really helps to show the reason why you need a tool like Property Stick, because you're right. You look at it from a macro scale and it seems like it all makes sense, but then you start to dig deeper into that property. The roof, when is the roof going to get replaced, and what's the status of the boiler or whatever HVAC system you have. There are a lot of things that you have to take into account, both for the immediate term as well as long term. And you have to factor all of those things in, which brings us right back to Property Stick. So tell us about Property Stick. What does it do? How does it benefit the property owner? And let's see what that's all about.
Sure. Well, the tool, as you heard, was kind of developed from this little piece, and we built on that and added this, and factors that really were targeted to very streamlined towards a residential rental property. So you can use the tool for maybe a multifamily or maybe a duplex, but it doesn't take into effect a lot of the factors that, let's say, for example, a commercial property or something that might be a fourplex or an eightplex or something like that. So again, it's very targeted towards that kind of residential property. And then our concept, we wanted to build something that added value to the small-time landlord, the first-time investor, somebody that might be having a property or two, and maybe they got lucky on one, or maybe didn't make the best investment on their first one, but still are interested in that world. But how can we add value and make it not only easy to find the information you need to, call them the inputs of a property, your purchase price and what's your down payment and, what are your expenses each month, but easy to find that information or to understand what inputs you need to maybe make an informed decision, but also a way to, on the back end of it, figure out, is this a good property? And so we built our platform for that kind of easy to understand analysis standpoint. And so on the back end of our process, for example, we call it our property summary, where there's kind of a green, yellow, red color coding system where, if your cap rate is above or below a certain line, it will give you, again, the corresponding green, yellow, red code for that. And it's kind of a matrix of sorts of, if you have all greens, then that probably suggests that property might be a strong performer and something to look further into. But, again, a mix of red and yellow and green, between, for example, some of our outputs are cap rate and debt to income ratio and cash on cash return. And again, as you start to look at that matrix, it, one factor in itself may not paint the true picture of a property, but we tried to build, just to finish the thought, a platform and a summary that was easy to understand for that kind of small landlord that, again, has one or two properties that's maybe not an expert in the real estate world.
So, Bryan, let me ask you, running these, and I'm sure you've ran all of them, and I love the idea that it's grown, and that's, the best ideas work that way, where, you're using it for your own business and it grows with it, and all your good ideas are put into the product. What would you say, are you surprised by when you run something and it comes back as not a good investment? Do they look good at first and then you run it and you say, oh, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense?
Well, it's a good question, Steve. What we found with our platform is that it sometimes it creates a very conservative environment around a property. So if you are honest with your input, saying, yes, in this example, the roof is, we probably can get a few years out of it, but it's going to go at some point soon, and it's going to, on this square footage, and as you get maybe contractors out or as investors reach into their bag of contractors and appraisers, they might say, well, this is going to cost X. In that case, it's 5 years down the road and it's going to cost us $5,000. If you are honest with your inputs, it really does shelter, I guess, an investor from making painting too rosy of a picture, I guess I would say, because it really will be difficult to find a property that is all greens, for example. And if you've been honest with your inputs and you understand that those are very realistic, and you get a property that, in this example, is all green, then that's a pretty strong performing property and may go quickly.
So when a property owner or a prospective property owner starts to use Property Stick, let's talk a little bit about those inputs. You referred to the greens, but they have to put some information into the system to start to get that information, the data back. Tell us a little bit about the process of setting up a property.
Sure. Well, we call it our kind of input wizard of sorts, and there's a million online tools that we feel like that. Some ask for information that is very simple. Some ask for some very complex information that may not be applicable to a specific property somebody's running. And so with our input wizard, it's essentially a 5-step process that we ask questions, for example, regarding your step number 1, for example, is some of your basic information regarding purchase price and down payment and your loan that you may or may not take out on the property, and what some of that information looks like. The next step is your reoccurring income and expenses. So it's your monthly rent, it's your vacancy rate, it's what can we expect to come in essentially, and what can we expect to go out from this property on a specific time period. Then as you move on in that process, it asks about your capital expenditures then. And so as we get down the road with this property, what items should we be looking at, and what is it going to cost, and how many years out do we need to plan that expense? So the example I used before was, well, the roof looks like it'll go in give or take 5 years, and give or take it's going to cost about $5,000. So we would enter those as, future capital expenses or CapEx expenses. It talks about closing the sale. What are our kind of closing the sale costs going to be, your traditional closing costs of sorts, and then immediately thereafter. So every property, I think we all kind of know that for the most part, they're probably not turnkey, and you're going to have to maybe, whether it's landscaping or it's paint and carpet or some of the cosmetic things, there's going to be some expense on the front end of your process that are real cash expenses, and an investor needs to account for those, of course. And then the back end is of that wizard is some assumptions that we've made for individuals. For example, what's the building value? For example, somebody might purchase a foreclosed property for $50,000, but the actual value of the property might be closer to 60 or 80 or 100,000 if they got a real good deal on it, for example. And you can account for that in your calculation to say, well, my purchase price was X and my loan was Y, but the actual value that I think I could probably turn around with some minimal initial costs up front, I could probably sell this thing for 80. Well, then we can take that into effect in terms of what now is your return on equity, which would be different than your purchase price. And so again, we make some assumptions that users can change if they'd like, but sometimes those may or may not apply to a specific property. So we try to make that input process relatively easy to understand and not ask for information that is either over the head of that kind of traditional first-time investor or small-time landlord, or not applicable to that specific residential property.
That was going to be my question, was where does that perfect balance lie? Is the first-time investor, is this something that they can grab onto right away, or is there a learning curve there for them where they got to sort of understand? I mean, obviously there's a learning curve. Anybody jumping into the real estate investing, I wouldn't recommend anybody just doing it and getting in there. Obviously education is first and foremost, but would you say that, somebody that's fairly new, getting into it, starting to understand the language, starting to recognize some of these, different things that you're mentioning, is that something that they can jump on and immediately start to run properties?
Yeah, it's part of our terms and conditions of our website. We try to make it just like our platform and the summary on the back end of a property with our green, yellow, red code. Part of our terms are, hey, when you're making a big investment, this is a tool to help, but don't use this as the end all be all. Make sure that you consult with, a realtor, for example, or an agent that might be able to give you some insight or offer a different opinion. But for the most part, it is relatively housed within itself in terms of giving you what we feel like is a complete picture of a certain property. And again, designed for that newer investor. So somebody that might be, brand new right out of the box, so to speak. This is very helpful, but we always suggest making it one data point of maybe a few others that you take into account when you're making a big purchase. And again, the property is not necessarily designed for somebody that, is 30 years in the business and that has 1 million commercial properties and has their own accountant and their own financial guy and has been doing it a certain way for many years. This might be may not have all of the inputs and all of the content that they would ask for their analysis. And, from that, just to kind of piggyback on that thought, so we've started to see a very strong demand from real estate organizations such as property management companies or brokers or real estate groups as another added value that they can offer their clients as a way to help set themselves apart. As an agent, if I brought an analysis tool or a report to a potential client and saying, here's a property that maybe we didn't look at first, but I ran some numbers and we should go check out this property. So we've seen a lot of demand from that, I call it the organization side of the market as a value added for their groups also, as well as that kind of first time individual investor. So that has been exciting to have those conversations also.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, Bryan. It's something that we see at RentPrep constantly. We get calls from property management companies, and exactly what you said. The first thing they say is, I'm looking to add value for my clients, and having tenant screening is one of those things, obviously. So I love the idea that property managers are jumping on this and starting to see it as a useful tool to add to their own toolbox. I think that's awesome. So have a lot of property managers started to dig in and use this?
Yeah, we've, again, our company is, I call it in its life cycle. It's very much in its infancy, if you will. And we've seen more and more demand as each passing day. We have another request from, again, whether it's a broker in Los Angeles or it's a property management group in Boston, for example. And we've started to get requests for, tell me more. And can you guys do this? And do you offer that? And can I, for example, have your tool on our site, and can we brand it as our own, as again a value-added piece for visitors to ABC Property Management or ABC Tenant Screening Services or Landlord Services or whatever that might be. And so again, that's a very new portion of our business, but yet something that we've had a lot of positive discussions with. Again, the kind of the organizational side of the real estate world versus the individual.
And so, is it something they can brand on their own?
We can, yes. We've, one of the many products that we're kind of building behind the scenes of sorts is essentially I call it a widget of sorts that with a very small snippet of code, we can create this analysis tool as that, in this example, as that property management company asks for. So if they wanted in their fonts and their colors and branded with their logo, for example, as their tool, and they are an expert in that analysis world for their clients, then we can do that. And some organizations have asked for, no, we do property management, and that's what we do, but we want a partner that knows the analysis side of the world, so let's partner together, and you guys brand it as the property stick analysis tool on our property management site, and we can together offer value for that property management company, for example.
Yes. Now, one of the things, and that's the route that you and I had talked about, Bryan. I said I love the idea that you guys are the experts in this field. I think the branding is perfect, and so I think that landlords love products like this because we're in this information age where everybody is doing things themselves. The internet now everything is surrounded around content, and all these companies are putting out just great content. And something like this comes along, and it's perfect because it gives them the ability to literally do it themselves. Like you mentioned, there might be that 30-year guy who has a whole team set in place and everything, but from even some of the interviews that Jeff and I have done, this is still a very, very growing industry, and people are just getting into it, and they're looking for that type of thing where they can do it on their own. They can just jump on and run their own numbers and get comfortable with it and learn it on their own. So this is perfectly suited for that.
So Bryan, you had talked earlier about the commercial properties that you had. You started with that commercial property and then you moved into residential. I was curious to get your thoughts about the differences between being a property owner who has a commercial property versus a residential property.
Well, that's a good question, Jeff. We've had, I guess, in some senses they're very similar. They're, for example, you put cash in and you make an investment, and you get cash out in some scenarios, and in some senses you have certain items to deal with on a residential property versus on a commercial property. But the biggest difference, I guess, that Jeff and I, my brother, my partner Jeff, and I had seen between the two was commercial is just that much more complex versus, again, in our world, a kind of a single family college rental that somebody that can pick up for $80 or $150,000 or somewhere in there, depending on your marketplace, and the simplicity again for that kind of first time investor or that small time investor that again doesn't want to deal with the headaches of a commercial property and for example in our world it was because we had a bar and grill, and so there were things like the health codes and how our fire system and our fire suppression over the grill, and how was that built into the building, and where were the outlets, and how was that maintained, and things like that again on a single family rental a block from campus you don't have to deal with. And that was probably the biggest thing. And again, that's just one simple example of kind of the complexity of a commercial headache, if you will, versus, hey, the window was busted on this property, and so we need to get that fixed, or the AC unit needs to be tuned up. And again, kind of hopefully that paints a bit of a picture of the complexity of, again, a headache that one property versus the other could bring to the table.
Right. And I've found that it really makes sense that if somebody wants to invest in rental properties, that they either need to focus on commercial or residential, but they really are, even though they're real estate and they're buildings, they're two completely different worlds. And like you did, you sold your commercial property and then moved into residential. I think that makes a lot of sense because you need to focus on those specific things that are specific to that type of property.
Well, you're right, and we had looked at the time. So again, in October of '09, or I guess leading up to the sale of that property, we had looked into maybe keeping that as part of our portfolio and adding in some of the residential properties, some of the easier to get into, maybe easier to get out of, easier to manage, where the numbers may not be as high in terms of what your your monthly investment coming back to you is. But we decided, to your point, that we wanted to, whatever we were going to do, we wanted to be able to dedicate our full attention to that. And that just seemed the right split for us, was to move out of the commercial real estate, take the investment that we made on that property and add it into the residential side of the real estate world.
It really does make sense to do it that way. Just focus in one area and get really good at that. And when you have a tool like the property stick, it really lets you focus on the numbers, the bottom line. One of the things that Steve and I talk about a lot when it comes to what landlords need to do, it's always about documentation. You need to make sure that all of your contracts and all of your documentation is in order. But this financial data is another big part of the documentation. It's really important for people to know going in what their financial situation looks like, looking again long-term as well as immediate and short-term. And Property Stick really brings a tool to the property owners or potential property owners that can make a huge difference in making sure that they don't miss the little things, like the roof, or as you said, the boiler, things that you don't think about when you're just starting out. But as soon as you jump in with both feet, they can make a huge difference between a property that you can afford to continue to own and make a little bit of money off of, or something that you just keep putting money into because you didn't plan and prepare properly.
Well, and I think you had mentioned it as Property Stick being kind of a tool in the toolbox of sorts for investors or agents or whomever that is. And I think in this age of technology, as the market continues to change, and not only the real estate market, but the technology market and ways that companies or whether it's brokers or landlords are kind of building their process or building their system. When I look at a property, I do X, Y, and Z, and then when I pull the trigger, now I manage it with A, B, and C tools. And I think the more of a systematic approach that an individual investor or that agent, for example, can go to market with, it makes it more efficient with how they manage their time and that process, again, by using A, B, and C tools. And then I think that's our kind of vision for this as a tool of many that a landlord, an investor, an agent can use amongst others that really can bring value to that real estate process.
And one of the things that you referred to a little bit earlier is the whole idea of coming to the table with all of this data and information. So if you go to a real estate agent and say, here's the way I see this property, they're going to look at you differently. The same thing if you go to a mortgage broker. If you're bringing solid data to the table, they're going to deal with you on a different level. I would think on a more professional level, because you're coming into this prepared. You know what you're doing. They're not looking at you as that guy that, yeah, I'm not sure if this person is really going to make it, because they don't have all of the information they need. Property Stick changes that significantly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, it's something that we've tried to, on both sides of that equation, in that example, the agent side and the investor side, where both sides can not only have access to the tool, but can understand the inputs, the summary or the analysis on the back end, and I think it brings credibility to the agent. For example, if they are wanting to close another sale or to move another property, for example, and get another property into an investor's hands, and then on the investor side, again, going to the agent, Jeff, as you said, and saying, here's something that I think makes sense, and these are the reasons why, and let's take a look at this analysis.
Right. The other type of person that I was thinking this might really help a lot is the accidental landlord. Someone who either inherits a property that they plan to or they're thinking of renting, or someone who owns a property they live in and they're moving. And so they're going to rent out the old place and buy or rent a new place. And it's really important for people to analyze their situation and to have all of that financial data to know whether or not it makes sense to keep it and rent it or move on. And Property Stick would be perfect for those types of accidental landlords.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that point up, something that I want to be careful how much, I guess, anticipation or excitement I build around this. But on a very case-by-case basis, we've offered your kind of traditional, our platform and our brand around a sell versus rent scenario for somebody that, again, has kind of stumbled into the accidental landlord scenario where we don't want to sell our house for a loss in this market, but we're into a different place, and so we've just decided to rent it. But now that lease is coming due, and should we sell it or should we rent it again? And looking at those inputs and then that analysis on the back end for that very specific scenario. And so we've seen some interest in that type of a build out, and we've provided that for a couple of very case specific users of ours.
That's great.
So, Bryan, I got a question for you. Just to switch gears a little bit here. I know you had some time as a landlord. Obviously, that's how you got into this. Did you have any horror stories, awful tenant situations? Is that the reason why you got out of the landlord business? Obviously, I know that you wanted to move into something different with the Property Stick, but every landlord sort of has that horror story. Was it something that you just couldn't deal with anymore, or you just wanted to move on and take the next step?
Well, I guess horror stories are all relative, but I think we've all heard the ones where they, leave the water running and the place is flooded, or, they leave the windows open and the heat's on all night. And, I guess the worst story that I would maybe bring in that kind of horror stories example is we just had a nice family. It was a single family rental. It was a mother, father and mother, and then two kids, and so nice family, and at first impression and background checking and so forth, everything made sense, but they just were not your cleanliest of renters of sorts, and they didn't maybe report things that probably should have been reported. Like, for example, we noticed that when we made the property run and we would go check out the property, that, for example, there was a woodpecker that had pecked a hole in the siding and was making a nest in there. And so we kind of offered up we need to get that repaired of sorts. But who knows where that woodpecker was in their house, for example, and they may not have noticed it. And so again, that was probably the worst experience that I can relate. Where again, it was just there was a lot of cleanup and a lot of kind of cosmetics, let's just say, to moving that renter, or after the renter had left, that that we noticed. So
Right.
again, nothing that was. I've heard many, many worse stories. So I guess in that sense, that I'm happy to report that is my worst story.
So it wasn't like somebody flushed concrete down the toilet and you said, "This is it. I'm done with it. I got to get out of it now."
No, we never had anything that bad. And as I may have mentioned to you guys off air, one of the reasons that we started our business now is that we've taken some of our investments in other places, and we've started the property stick with that, as we're very confident in this as an approach to the market, and kind of a disruptor of sorts in the industry, or a big value added piece, a big gap in the market, or whatever you want to use in terms of terminology, that we are very confident in, that it will only grow from here as we continue to add services, add continued tools around the analysis world.
I agree. I think there's a big opening for it. Like you said, there's probably a million calculators out there, but you start to really niche down, and then you get into, well, we're going to look at a calculator that does specific rentals, and then we're going to take a calculator that digs down even deeper, and we could start analyzing everything, like the repairs and everything else that you mentioned. So I love the idea that it grew. It was an organic growth that grew, as you felt it was needing those features, and so that became part of the product. Those are always the best ideas.
Yeah, no, we're excited about what the future holds, and more specifically, we always try to talk about not ourselves, but the end user and what it can bring to the table. For example, I mean, our product is kind of your a free and premium service where everybody can use our product and still get the metrics that they need, and we offer the premium service to drill down into some of the finer points. For example, a discounted cash flow of that specific property, and some of the premium add-ons that a user could pay for through our platform. But again, it's a free service for everybody to get that kind of green, yellow color coding, and a way to start to look at a property and to see maybe a different way of analyzing a specific property. And we think, in short, when users begin to experience that, I think that it will just, again, organically grow on itself. And we've got many referrals from one agent to another, from one investor to another, and that is our way of knowing that our product is well received.
Definitely. Well, sooner than later, it'll be found on RentPrep. I know that we're working on incorporating it. We're working on developing a new client area that we're going to be featuring it in there. So any RentPrep members will be able to find it in there. And of course, obviously, in our show notes, we'll have a link to the site. It's propertystick.com. And I think you got an awesome idea here, Brian. We wish you the best.
Yes, Brian.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I appreciate you guys having us on. And as I said at the open, we're excited to bring the technology to the marketplace, and continue to add services and add value to the landlords, the investors, the agents, and organizations of the real estate world.
Great. And again, that's propertystick.com, and you guys are involved in all of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Google+, LinkedIn, and all of that can be found at the website. And certainly encourage everyone to check out the website and see what this tool is about. And I think you'll see why Steve and I are as excited about it as we are, and looking forward to the ongoing success, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at the